Good, so let's start that recording. So what I'm going to do today, I was kind of wondering how to do this. What I'm going to do is now we've seen the basics of how our Markdown works, and you're hopefully all happy with the basics of it. What I'd like to do today is run you through some of the options for making your documents better, making them more readable, improving the formatting, adding tables of contents and that sort of thing. I was thinking about the best way to do this, and I started writing slides, and then I thought, no, you really don't want to sit there and watch me droning on over slides. So what I've actually ended up with is a giant Markdown file of despair with all of these things in them. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk you through it, and as we talk through it, I'm going to add some of these things into our Markdown document, and we'll go through it, and you can see how the document changes as we add these extra things to the Markdown document. Most of what we're going to be doing will be thinking about HTML documents, but I'm briefly going to show you an absolute top tip for formatting Word documents straight out of Markdown as well. We'll do that at the end, I think. So let's start with my giant Markdown file, and I think it's probably going to be, given that we're going to be repeatedly rendering this file, it's probably going to be easiest if I just share my whole screen. Let me just do that, and then when I knit files, you're going to be able to see them rather than me having to go to the share content thing and then shut it down and start it up again. So if I share that screen and then bring up our studio, let's make it bigger, and I'm going to make the text bigger as well. So it's not that. There we go. Is that big enough for everyone, or do we want it even bigger? You can just pop something in the chat or speak.
It's fine. For me, it's fine.
It's fine. Okay. If it's not big enough for anyone, just say, and then we'll get on with it. Okay, everyone's happy. You adore that size. Oh, I'm so happy. That's really nice. Okay, so what we've got here is as I said, a Markdown file of despair with all kinds of stuff. You can see down the right-hand side, we've clicked this button so we can see all of our sections. So that gives you a bit of a sneak preview as to what we're going to be doing. The headers, which we're going to be messing with repeatedly, are almost the default ones. I've added these in because it would be complicated to get it to knit without these. We'll discuss that when we talk about adding references to your document. So for the moment, just pretend those are not there and that it's just a standard set of headers. So this is our giant document. I'm just gonna render it to HTML so you can see what it looks like with all the default options. So here's our render document popped up in the RStudio viewer. So we've got some code. We've got some stuff that's a bit annoying that it tells us when it runs the code. We don't really want that there. Then we've got some more code here. Then we've got that same interactive plot that we looked at yesterday, where we can do things like get rid of all the mails with a single click. If only things were so easy, ladies. And then we've got lots more stuff down here. So the document as it is kind of okay, but it's a bit of a mess. If you're wanting to read that, it wouldn't be much fun. And there's lots of things we can do to make it more easy to navigate it and get rid of things like these annoying messages it's telling us. So we're going to start with just looking at adding some chunk options to make things look easier, and then we're going to talk quickly about adding maths. So before we start messing with the headers, we'll talk about messing with the chunk options. So we've got two chunks of code here. You'll notice that because I'm a bad person, I haven't labeled my chunk. You're not meant to use underscores in the labels. For whatever reason, I'm going to use an underscore anyway, and I don't care. We don't need that. So you can see we've already got one chunk option here. So I've specified the figure caption. And one thing you can notice is that I've actually put some Markdown formatting in the figure caption. And if you do that, it will render your figure caption with that Markdown formatting. So this figure will render with a bold figure 1, and then everything else just in normal text. So that's something to remember, is that you can do things within your figure captions, even though they're enclosed with quote marks. They're not just treated as characters; it's actually plonked in, and then the Markdown is rendered. But what we want, we'd like to kind of get rid of that, of those warnings that it pops up and things like that. So we can add chunk options here. There's a full list at this web page, and you can see that, you know, R Markdown is still a little bit messy. So as we talked about, it's derived from this knitter package, and in fact it's kind of running over the top of knitter. So when we looked at drawing tables yesterday, we had to pull a function out of knitter that's not still included in R Markdown. And the kind of canonical list of chunk options is actually on this site for knitter, not for R Markdown. But anyway, there's a full list there. There's an awful lot of these, but I've just added some here that I find useful and that I use a lot. So you can specify figure width, and you can specify figure height. This sets the figure size in inches. You remember yesterday when we were putting image files into our document, we specified a figure width in pixels. Well, this specifies figure size in inches. There's probably a way of setting it so that you can use centimeters or pixels, but the default option is inches, just to make things more complicated. For those of you who haven't been brought up in a really confused country like Britain, where we're so sad that we use inches and centimeters, 1 inch is 2.54 centimeters. So you can set the figure size. If you just set 1, then it will be drawn proportional, but with that width or that height. So you only really need to set 1 of these, unless you want to change the aspect ratio of the figure in some way. And then we've got the figure caption option, which we've already seen, which generates a figure caption. Then we've got some things that turn things off. It would make more sense actually if we move this to later on, but let's just do that. So your code chunks will often produce things that you don't want. So we've already seen that in that when we run this, we get that series of messages telling us about everything that ggplot and plotly is masking, and we don't want those. We can turn those off with message equals false. If you're concerned about warnings, if you run an analysis that gives you a warning, so for example, if you do a chi-squared test, quite a lot of the time R will give you a warning to remind you that the p-values you're getting are approximate p-values and not exact p-values. And if you don't want that warning to appear in your document, you know, because it's just going to, well, if you're sending it to anything with a reviewer, you can bet your life that reviewer 2 is not going to know anything about chi-square test. It's going to go, oh, what's that? There's a warning. You're not doing your analysis right. And then you'll have to write an essay for the editor on chi-square tests. So you don't want to include those things. So you can turn off the warnings by doing that. And comment equals NA. If you have a chunk that's generating text, so just producing some numbers in some way, the default option is to print it into your document with comment symbols beforehand, or the comment symbols that we use in R. And if you say comment equals NA, that turns it off. You can also specify a comment a different symbol to use. So if you say comment equals banana, then it will print with the word banana at the start of every line, which, you know, is the kind of thing that amuses me, but then I have a very small mind. So that's what these do. Let's just show you what happens when we rerun this with message equals false as a chunk option. So I'm just going to knit this again, and then we're going to get our browser window popping up, and hopefully that particular thing will be fixed. Yeah, so now that's fixed, and the whole thing looks a lot better. Okay, we've now got an option which is tidy equals true. That's not really to do with whether or not you think that dplyr and ggplot2 are the greatest packages in the universe and Hadley Wickham is God. If you have long lines of code and you render a Markdown document, sometimes they'll spill over the edge of your page. And allegedly, setting tidy equals true will fix that. In fact, in my experience, a lot of the time it doesn't. And really, in my experience, if you have this problem, the best thing to do is make sure that you don't have long lines of code. So to give you an example, let's try and generate an example. Let's put this on the same line as this. So now that's a really long line of code. That's all one single line. Let's see if it'll flop over the end. Yeah, so you can see, oh, it's actually wrapped it. But even so, it isn't very pretty. It's probably wrapped it because it's funny ggplot code. Let's try something else. So I'm just going to add a code chunk, and we're going to put in a massive plot. We're going to put in a massive plot function call. Nice long name for the color. So that's hanging over the edge of our document width. Let's add a Y label as well, just to make it really long. So let's render that and see what it looks like. And I'm just going to add that. I think tidy equals true might be implemented by default now, which might be what's causing things to happen. Yeah, so it's actually wrapped it there. So that may be something that they've fixed recently. But it may well be that if you render to PDF or Word, it hangs over the edge. Let's try rendering it to a Word document. It might not like it because I've got lots of HTML specific stuff further down. No, it doesn't. It doesn't like it. Yeah, because I've got HTML stuff further down, so we're not going to worry about it. But anyway, if you do have problems with your code hanging over the edge, then something you may not know, well, you probably know that you can do this after each argument and make it long and thin rather than really wide. What you might not know is that RStudio will actually do this automatically for you. So if you highlight your code and you press either Windows or Command, if it's a Mac, Shift A. No. I love it when a plan comes together. Control Shift A. There we go. On a Mac, it's Command Shift A. On Windows, it's Control Shift A, not Windows Shift A. It will actually tidy up your code for you and make it all look like this, which is really helpful. So that's Control Shift A or Command Shift A on a Mac will do that for you. So if you've got code hanging over the edge, Control Shift A it, and it should hopefully sort you out, assuming you don't have any axis labels that have got 2,000 words or something like that. But anyway, there you go. Right, enough of that. So tidy equals true. You can try that if you've got lines of code spilling over the edge, but it's best just not to have long lines of code. And then eval equals false. We talked about that yesterday. That means the code chunk will be included in the document, but it won't actually be evaluated. And the one that we get for our default options is include equals false. That means the code chunk's evaluated. So it's not like eval equals false. The code chunk is run, but there's no output put in the document. But if you generate numbers or something, or if you generate an object, it will be available for the rest of your document to access. Okay, so those are our chunk options. One thing to point out is that fancy trick that we did to make our code long and thin rather than very wide. You mustn't do anything like that with your chunk options. It's all got to be a single line of text. Starting here and ending here. There's no carriage returns in there. So I've not pressed the enter key anywhere. You can have a very long single line of text, but it has to be a single line of text, which is a bit of a shame. Okay, and then we can, in addition to setting chunk options singly, we can set global chunk options. So let's say we want all the figures in our document to be 5 inches tall and 4 inches wide. We can set those as global chunk options in the in this R setup chunk here. I wouldn't recommend doing it anywhere else. I've just put this in as an example, and you can see I've put eval equals false as one of our chunk options, so that it's not actually going to evaluate that. So that means that every figure you produce will be 5 inches tall and 4 inches wide, unless you put a figure width or a figure height in the chunk option of a particular chunk, in which case it will override that. So you can have most of your figures being a particular size. You can set that in your setup chunk as a global option, and then you can have specific figures being different sizes if you so desire by setting that within a single chunk option. So that's how to change things, how to change what happens with your code chunks using chunk options. Is everyone happy about that? Any questions about that? No questions, so I guess you're all happy, okay, or asleep, or everyone's left and I don't know about it. Okay. Oh, there's a, oh, someone's happy. Good. Right, back to R. So if you want to add maths to your document, if you want to add equations, you can do that, and there is a really powerful system for doing that. So we talked a little bit about LaTeX yesterday. One thing that is built into LaTeX is a kind of separate language within LaTeX for generating maths, and this is what professional mathematicians use. And it generates really nice, really well formatted maths output. And you can use LaTeX maths notation in an R Markdown document, and it will generate equivalent, really high grade maths output for you. One small caveat is that it does it by using an online Java renderer called MathJax. So if you generate a document and then you're trying to view it when you don't have internet access, you might lose the maths, which has happened to me on a couple of occasions and caused me confusion. But that's the only sort of caveat there. If you render to PDF, I think it will be there anyway, because the PDF's not going to be going on the web and using the Java renderer to make them. So this is just an example. If you want an equation or something that is centered in your document, you just put $, and then you put your LaTeX maths there, and then you put a second pair of dollar symbols. And RStudio, you see, will actually helpfully render that for us while we're editing, just so that we know it's coming out nicely. And then this is all LaTeX maths code. It takes a little while to learn it. I'm not going to talk about it in detail, because that would take all afternoon and probably cause distress. But just to talk you through it, we've got all these control options here. So they all start with a backslash. So \sum, that says add a sum symbol. \left bracket, that generates the left bracket. Then x minus bar x is there, right bracket, and then raised to the power 2. So this is a sum of squares. And it's not hard to work out how to generate maths using LaTeX, and you can get some really nice results. There's a more complicated example here. So if I click on that, you can see it renders it for us. I've made it large, and that's now the formula for the sample variance. So we've got a fraction and various other bits and pieces. So if you know how to do LaTeX maths, you can do that very, very easily. If you don't, like I say, it's not that hard to work it out, and there's lots and lots of stuff online to help you. And you can also add inline maths. So just as we can add inline code, you can add inline maths. So there's just an example here. The fitted model was, and then it's a single $sign on each side, and then we've got some stuff there, and that will render to that. We've got some questions. Doesn't appear in the actual document. What were you rendering it to HTML, Beth?
No, it looks fine when I hit knit, but yours appears below in those little boxes. You said it would show it in the where you're coding, and mine doesn't, because I did that.
RStudio just does it automatically. I don't know how you turn it on and off. Yeah, it just
doesn't matter. I'll play with it.
Yeah, I mean, again, make sure you've got the latest version of RStudio, and hopefully it'll do it for you. So if we just knit this now, you can see how it looks. No, it's because it thinks it's knitting to Word still, knit to HTML. Joe's took a while to appear. There you go. So this is our document again, and this is what the maths looks like. So you can see it's really really nicely formatted, really good stuff. And if you want to put in complex maths, this is the way to do it. This is much more powerful than the equation editor they've got in Word. Although I understand that the latest Word versions actually let you put latex in, which probably led to, you know, great disturbance in the force, as though 100,000 mathematicians had all cried out in horror. Looks good. Okay, right. So that's how to add maths. Then we're going to talk about adding references. And again, I'm not going to go into detail here, but just to give you a quick run through of what you can do. So you can add references to your Markdown document. Yeah, if you've got a question, I'm not going to keep looking at the chat every time someone says something. So if you've got a question, best to ask it with your microphone. Otherwise, I'll just leave you to talk amongst yourselves. So there is a way of adding references to our Markdown document. There's a couple of options, but the most common one is to use BibTeX. BibTeX is what people use to add references to LaTeX documents. In order to do this, you need a BibTeX library. That might sound difficult, but any reference management system worth its salt will export to a BibTeX library for you. And a BibTeX library is just a text file with a series of entries for each document that you might want to reference. So if you've got everything in Mendeley or Zotero, you can just export your library to a BibTeX library, and you can use that. Zotero now has closer integration with R Markdown, including you can actually click and pull from your Zotero library, and it will drop the site key into your R Markdown document. I'm led to believe. I've not tried it myself, but there's now allegedly really close integration between Zotero and R Markdown. Obviously, Mendeley and similar things are owned by giant evil corporations that hate open source software, so I'm sure they wouldn't do anything like that. So you have a BibTeX library. I'll just quickly show you what a BibTeX library looks like. Where's my library? It's in here somewhere. Yeah. We're going to open that. Actually, I'm just going to open that in our Markdown. Drag it onto there. No, won't do it. This is a PC, not a Mac. I don't want to open it in TeXworks. Hang on. I'm going to open it in Notepad because it's just a text file. So this is our text file. Each of these entries is has all the details of a reference that we might want to use, and the thing at the top is the site key. If you just say @McGurran, it will then cite the reference associated with that in your library. And like I say, you can generate these automatically with most reference management software. So that's what a BibTeX library looks like. you then add your site key where you want your reference. So I've turned that into code, so it's not going to render it. But so we've got square brackets, and then we've got the site key inside the square brackets. And then when you render the document, it will automatically format those references and produce a reference list at the end. You can also set the style to use using a CSL file. CSL files are files specifying particular journal styles. If you go to the Zotero repository, I've got the link there, you can find a CSL file for pretty much any journal you can think of. So you can say, I want my references done in the style of the Journal of Animal Ecology. So the bibliography and the CSL file both get specified in the headers, and they're hard left without any indentation. So that was what I was talking about earlier. So there they are. So if we render this document, get on with it. If we render this document and we go down to our referencing thing, so you can see that it's now formatted that reference that we put in nicely. And if we go to the bottom of the document, we've got a references section, and it's added the word references because the Journal of Animal Ecology uses the word references rather than the word bibliography. And then we've got the formatted reference there. So it does a very nice job actually of doing that. So if you want to write, no, we're not going to do that. So if you want to write papers, actual papers using R Markdown, you can do it, and you can include all your references if you want. If you're doing a code-heavy thesis and you think that it might actually be best for you to do your thesis in Markdown, there's no problem with getting the referencing done, for example. So that's a really nice thing you can do in R Markdown. Just for the avoidance of doubt, most of these things that we're talking about here are not available in standard Markdown. These are things that have been added into R Markdown. So if you find yourself using a different Markdown thing, so for example, quite a few like online forums, you can put in code, you can put in commentary in Markdown, GitHub uses Markdown, then you're not going to be able to, or it's unlikely you'll be able to add nicely formatted LaTeX maths and references and you know, tables of contents and things like that. So that's kind of the first chunk, ho-ho, of what I was wanting to talk about this afternoon. So how to use chunk options, and then adding some really cool stuff, so referencing and adding maths. And then we're going to talk about, you know, making your document prettier. So first thing is, well, maybe you want a table of contents. That's dead easy. You add TOC true, but it has to be indented under the output option you're going to choose. There's no global header that will cause you to get a table of contents. So if you want a Word document as well, you have to add output Word document TOC true as well. And one thing to notice, well, let's do it up here. Let's get rid. So when I asked it to render it to Word, RStudio actually added that in without asking, which it does. So if you just generate your standard starting Markdown document, it will have this. It will just say output HTML document. If you want to add more options in under HTML document, you have to indent HTML document under output. RStudio will do this for you. No, it won't. RStudio will do this for you automatically if you add a colon at the end. So at the moment it doesn't have a colon, but now we're going to add options. So there's got to be a colon there which says there's more to come. It does kind of make sense if you like that kind of thing. So we've added a colon. I'm just going to hit return, and our studio will actually put that indentation in properly, and it will even do it using spaces rather than tabs, because as we know, tabs are evil and people who use them go to hell. Right, so once we've done that, we then have to add our option there. And if we now render the document, we should have a table of contents at the beginning. If you go back up, so there we now have our table of contents. And you can see that it's got the, so I'm mostly using header 2s. It's got the header 2s, and then it's got the header 3s as well. If we don't want those header 3s, we can add a further option. So that's table of contents depth, and that's saying only give a table of contents to header 2. The default option, I think, is 3. So if you've got headers below level 3, you won't get them unless you ask for it. But if you say that, you'll only get the table of contents listing level 2 headers. So let's reknit that. Yeah, so you can see now we've only got a few options there, and these are formatted as hyperlinks. So if you click on those, it'll take you to the relevant section. And then a final thing we can do, which is super cool, for specialized definitions of cool, if we say TOC float, that will then generate a floating table of contents. Well, hopefully it will. Yeah. So now we've got this floating table of contents here, and that will stay where we are. So we go down through the document, and you can see that the highlighting on it actually changes according to the section that we're in. So that will always be visible as you go through a document. If you try and specify a floating table of contents and you end up with something, sometimes it munges it if your window's too narrow. Let's try again. No, it's working. Okay, so it just always works. If you do that and it comes out with part of this splashed over this, just make the viewer window wider and it will hopefully fix it. A final thing to do is we can change the depth, and we should get a slightly prettier table of contents. Right, so that looks the same, but we now get those subsections if we click on those. So that's one easy way to make your HTML document much more accessible and much more readable. You can add tables of contents, and if you had a floating table of contents, it can be very, very helpful indeed. Right, next up, code folding. This is the other thing that really makes a difference to your documents. So,
sorry, Rob, can I ask a quick question?
Ask away.
Can you comment your R Markdown script? Can you put like comments in it so that you remember what these kind of options do? Is there any way to do
that? Yes, but I can't remember. You can comment the headers and you can comment elsewhere. I think it depends on what you're rendering to. So if you're going to be rendering to HTML and you use the HTML comment format, which is, what is this, that weird arrow ... thing, isn't it? Anyway, if you're rendering to HTML and you use the HTML format comments, I think they won't appear in the final document.
Okay.
And I think you can comment your headers, but I'm not 100% sure.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a great question, Joe. Really good question. Why don't you find out the answer and tell everyone? That's what I say a lot in lectures. So the next thing we can do is we can add code folding. So if you want your code to be available but not always there in your document, you can add this to your headers. Again, okay, this will only work under HTML, and floating tables of contents will only work under HTML. But if you add that to your header like this, so we've got HTML document indented after output, and then we've got this indented after HTML document. So we can add that in as well. Code folding hide will give you this. Once it renders. Right, so we've got our pretty thing there. So we've got one button here, and that will allow us to show and hide all of the code. But then each code chunk, instead of having the whole code chunk there, we've just got a little button that says code, and you can click that and it pulls down the code, and then you can click it again and it goes away. So let's say you've got this very exciting plot. I'm just going to make it even wider so we get the full stuff with where you can get rid of things and yada yada, and you think that's really cool. I wonder how they drew that graph. You can just click on that and it pulls that down, and you can click on it and it goes away. So you can make easy to read, accessible documents which still have the code available to the reader, which is brilliant in my opinion. I think that's absolutely fantastic. The other option is if you render it with code folding show. I won't do that because it's not worth spending much time on, but that will render a document with the default option being for the code to be visible, but where the reader can hide the code by clicking those buttons as well. So doing that can really make a difference to the readability of your document, and I think it's well worth doing. You can only do it as a global option. You can't have parts of the document where there is code folding and parts where there isn't. And like I say, it only works for the HTML output, but it's brilliant. Right, so that was code folding. You can have automatic section numbering just by adding number sections. This will work in PDF and Word as well. Not much to say about that, except that if you're going to ask it to number the sections, you probably want to have your top level header being header 1. Because otherwise it will start numbering the sections as 0.1, 0.2, 0.3 and things like that. But you can turn on automatic section numbering. So that's a really nice thing you can do. I should say, if anyone's wondering, I'll email you all a copy of this Markdown document when we're finished. So you'll have all of this. Next thing we can do is we can change the appearance of our document. So one thing that's not especially easy in Markdown is doing things like changing the font and changing the color of the font and things like that. You've got two options if you want to do this. Well, for an HTML document. Your first option is to write your own cascading style sheet. And if you don't know what a cascading style sheet is, then that's going to be difficult for you. But if you want to produce documents with very bespoke styling, you can certainly do that. The other thing you can do is you can use one of the built-in themes. So there's a set of HTML themes called the boot swatch themes. Some, but not all of these, can be used in a Markdown document, and you do that. And again, this is for HTML, and you do that by specifying the theme. So just to show you what this does, if we go to the top, we're going to add yet more we'll use the cerulean theme because it always reminds me of that marvelous section in The Devil Wears Prada, where she talks about blue jumpers. There we go. So if we specify theme cerulean, you can see our document now looks a bit different. We've got different colors here. The headers are now blue. It's probably using a slightly different font, and so on. So it changes the look of the document. Some of these are nicer than others. Flatly is one that I quite like. So if we just have a look at what that does, and again, we've got a somewhat different font. Our code things are now gray rather than white. We've got different coloring on here. And you can see I reckon that generates a really nice looking document. If you want a dark background, so let's say you're producing documents for students, and you have a student who's dyslexic and says that they find it much easier to read dark background documents with pale text. This happened to me in the MSc Stats module. If you want to generate dark background documents for them, all you have to do is change the theme. If you change the theme to darkly, it will generate a document with a dark background. So it's no trouble at all to provide your students with actually both options, and let them choose which one they prefer. The only thing I don't like about this is the lime green color it uses on occasion, but you know, beggars can't be choosers. Also, the code chunks are formatted in dark on pale, which is maybe not ideal, but anyway, that's a fairly nicely thought out dark theme that you can use if you want as well. Let's go back to flatly. So these themes are available. If you go to the website, you can see what they all look like. As I say, they're not all available, but there's a list there of the ones that are available. Default is just the one that you get if you don't specify anything. A final point is, if you really want to have your own bespoke formatting, if you specify theme null, it will render it as a kind of unformatted HTML document, and you can then do whatever you like with your cascading style sheet. So let's just see what that looks like. It doesn't like it. You must use a theme when specifying the TOC float option. Okay, so let's just get rid of that. Must use a theme when specifying the code folding option. So we're not going to do that, because I don't want to take everything out. But you can. But if you specify theme null, it just generates a kind of flat HTML document. Okay. And then if you want to change the syntax highlighting, you can do that as well. So the syntax highlighting is the the syntax. Where's the browser? It's gone. The syntax highlighting is the way it colors the code in your code chunks. This is going to change depending on the theme that you use. That's no good. Yeah, so you can see it's highlighted certain things here. So character strings are highlighted, and library function calls are highlighted in bold. So let's see what it looks like with Haddock instead. Sometimes this doesn't play nicely with the different themes, so let's just try it. Try Zenburn, because that sounds nice, doesn't it? Yeah, so Zenburn, you can see, gives you your code with some quite complex highlighting. So function calls are yellow, character strings are orange, comments are in green, but it's also on quite a dark background. So if we change that theme to darkly, not darkly, we'll then have a dark background document with our code boxes, or at least the R code chunks, formatted with dark backgrounds. You can see that now it's done something else, and our code is falling off the edge, as we talked about before. So that's something to watch out for. But so we can now have a more dark background option than we would have done before. So anyway, let's try TextMate. We'll go back to Flatly. I can never remember what these different syntax highlighting options look like, so usually I just fiddle with them until I find one that works. Yeah, so it's changed the syntax highlighting. This is quite a subtle one. So we've got commentary, we've got comments in green, we've got character strings in green, we've got library calls in blue, and it's changed the background as well. I think we'll leave that in because I quite like that. It doesn't work for code chunks, so this is just an unformatted code chunk. So it's not gonna look funny. It's not going to change the appearance with our syntax highlighting. Anyway, that's syntax highlighting. Everyone happy with the HTML themes and the syntax highlighting? Silence. Speak now or forever hold your peace. Is that a comment? Let's look at the comments. Ignore that I can't spell comment. Oh, thanks, Joe. Yeah, so in the comment section, that's an HTML comment line that Beatrice put in there. So you can comment it with that, and it's not going to show if you render to HTML. It might well show if you render it to Word or PDF. I don't know. And you can comment in the YAML section with just a hash. So that's great. Cool. Right. Next up, we're going to look at the last thing that can make things really, really neat, and that is adding tabs. And we do this in a different way. So there isn't a header option that will tab the whole document for you, but you can tab bits of your document. You can tab the whole document if you want to. And you do this this is something that they added to R Markdown quite recently. This is actually changing, I think it's a way of changing an HTML class attribute. But anyway, if you add this, so curly brackets with .tab set, where did it go? I hate it when it does that. So if you add curly brackets with .tab set after a header, what it will, I'll show you what it does. But you can see we've got a tab section header, and then we've got two, so that's a level 3 header, and then we've got 2 level 4 headers and a level 5 header. And then we've got a level 2 header down here. So if we render this, let me show you what it looks like if we render it. If we go down to here, so that bit we were looking at, if we just move this over here, this bit here renders to this. So the header where you say tab set is the header of the tabbed section, and then you have 2 tabs that you can flick between, and it changes the content. And you see I added, so this is a level 3 header, and then these are both level 4 headers. then I added a level 5 header that just says not a tab. You can see that the level 5 header doesn't become a tab. So when you add tab set to a header, all of the next level headers underneath it will be rendered as tabs, and it will do that until it meets a header at the same level or higher than the one where you put tab set. Does that make sense? Just say if you're a bit confused. Okay, everyone's happy. This is how I generated that document with the Markdown formatting things yesterday, which you may recall has lots of tabs. So you aren't restricted to 2 tabs. You can have loads of tabs if you want. And you can then customize your tabs. There's 2 ways of doing this. If you add tab set pills, it changes the way the tabs look. And if you add tab set fade, then the tabs that you're not clicked on kind of fade when you're not mousing over them. It's a kind of subtle effect, but it makes it a bit posher. So if we go back to our viewer window, can we find our viewer window? No. Oh, there we go. So if we add that, you can see that we've got a different formatting of our tabs. They're now pale on dark when you click on them, which is what it means by pills. And they're not really fading much. I think it fades more if you have this style here. Yeah, so you can change the appearance of your tabs a little bit, and those will look different depending on the theme that you're using. So that's a really neat thing you can do with your document, and that obviously it's not useful for all documents, but it is useful for some documents. So just to use that, and so we've now got a whole wad of YAML headers here that we've added on to make our document pretty. And if we go down to here where it says some useful chunk options, we can do that. That's a level 3 header. And then we can change these to level, actually no, let's change that to a level 2 header. Do you know, the even best way to do it is to add another header. So we're going to add a level 2 header here. And we're going to call it chunk options, maths and referencing. And we're going to make that a tab set, and then we've got our chunk options. We're going to make our global chunk options a level 4 header, so that doesn't appear as a tab. We've got adding maths, and then we've got references all as level 3 headers, and then we've got bells and whistles as another level 2 header, and we're going to tab this section as well. So that's a level. So this section here, called chunk options, maths and referencing, will have these things as tabs. So it will have some useful chunk options. Let's just call that chunk options. Just to make the text in the tab shorter. So that set of tabs will go down to the end of references, and then we'll have another set of tabs underneath it in the document, which will have these options here: the table of contents, the code folding, and the section numbering, the HTML themes, and the syntax highlighting. And then we'll have the actual section on tab sections as a final set, as a final bit of the document underneath that. Fingers crossed, hit the button, wait for it to render. Boom, there we go. So So you can see, rather than having these just as a continuous document, we've now got these options as tabs that we can access, and then we've got another set down here. If we make the document wider, then it will pull them all out into a single line. So you can click between those rather than having to go up and down the document. No, they're not tabs within tabs. They are just tabs. You can add another tab set within a set of tabs if you want, but your life will just get complicated, and your readers will get confused and will not thank you. So we've got an overall document. We've just got this at the beginning. We've then got this set of tabs here, and then we've got another set of tabs here. If you want to add space between your tabs, between tab sets, it's quite difficult. So this is a bit close to this. One option is to, and you can see it kind of moves up and down as you go through this. One option is to add some white space to the end of each of your tabs, which will improve the look of the document. So if we just go back up to here. So adding white space is difficult in R Markdown. The way I usually do it, if I'm knitting to HTML, is I just use the HTML line break tag, and I just use a bunch of those. So that'll add 5 lines worth of line space at the end of that, but that will only show when you're clicking on that tab. So you have to do it at the end of each of your tabs if you want to keep that white space there. And you have to remember to keep an empty line between that and your next header. Otherwise, it won't realize it's a header. So let's see what that looks like when we render it. It's done something funny. So you can see we've got this white space now, and that's all nice. But something odd has happened in my chunk options. Let's just go back. And that is because I put the white space in the wrong place. So if you just put in a bunch of character returns, it won't recognize that as white space. You have to actually tell it. So we want to put this in here. I don't know why that disappeared as well. These things always work fantastically until you try and show someone else, and then they break, as I'm sure you're all aware. All right, it's because we've got code folding. That's why. Right. Yeah, and that's all fine. So if you want to add gaps between your sets of tabs or anything else, then you can use that BR HTML code. I'm actually going to take that down to 3 lines because it's a bit much. This is probably a very bad thing to do because almost everything I do in HTML seems to be frowned upon by HTML purists, but it does actually work, which is a big advantage. Yeah, so that's a bit less of a gap now. It doesn't look quite as odd. Yeah, and I'm actually going to change that back to the standard tabs to make the fact that this is a set of tabs more obvious. Sorry, I'm just now formatting the document so that I like it on the fly and not telling you why I'm doing things. This will be finished in just a second. Yeah, so that's a bit easier to understand because it's clearer that this is a set of tabs as opposed to the previous option. Yeah, there we go. Right. So that's all I really wanted to talk about with regards to prettifying your HTML documents. For PDFs, you really have to be a bit of a LaTeX whiz to do it, and I'm not going to talk about that if for no other reason than because, as I said yesterday, I broke my PDF. I broke my LaTeX installation yesterday, and I haven't been able to fix it yet. Anyone got any questions about that before we move on to Word documents, which will not take long? No, everyone's blissfully happy, or at least too horrified to speak. Okay, so that's all how you can generate very, very pretty HTML documents really quite easily. It's actually quite easy to generate nice looking custom Word documents as well. There's some things that aren't available, like code folding, which is a real shame because code folding makes a big difference to how your document looks. But if you want a specific formatting for your Word document, there's an easy way to generate nicely formatted documents that aren't using the base Word template and that you can render straight out of R Markdown. So I'm just gonna, no, I'm not going to open that document. I'm just going to open a Word document I prepared earlier, which is called Word Template. So it's opened over here. So can you all see that it's a bit small? Is that visible to everyone? I can just make it bigger. There we go. That's too big. There we go. So this is actually from the default R Markdown document that I just rendered into a Word document. Once I'd rendered it into a Word document, I then changed some of the styles. So hopefully you're at least vaguely familiar with the styles that Word uses. And these are, or some of these are directly equivalent to things like the header level in a Markdown document. So header 1, so title for a Word document is the same as the title for your Markdown document. Header 1 is the same as header 1 for your Markdown document. So I've changed these. So I've changed the title to a different font, to Roboto Light. I've made it bigger and I've changed the color. And you can then, if you go and then find your title style, which is here, the easy thing to do is right click on it. You need to, yeah, that's selected. I'm just going to change the size, make it even bigger. So if we pull this down, we go to title, you right click on it and you say update title to match selection. And what that means is that if you put any text in and you tell Word that you want it to be formatted as a title, it will then have the same formatting as that. So you can go through and you can change your styles to whatever you want to make your document look less like a default Word document. So this is a header 2 and I've changed the header 2 style to look like that. This is body text. So if you change the body text style, you can do that. So the default version in Word is Calibri, I think, nowadays. I've changed it to Roboto for whatever reason. So I've changed these styles, and then I've saved the document. I've called it Word template, but it's not actually a Word template. It's a Word document that I'm using as a template. Template's maybe not the best word to use. So you can save templates in Word, but this isn't a template document. This is a standard document. Why did I call it Word template when I knew it would just cause trouble? Anyway, so that's saved in the same directory as we're working. Yes, we'll save those. So I've closed that. So here's a document called Word example. And if you look, you see I've added something in the headers here. So under Word document, so we've got Word document indented under output with a colon. And we then said reference docx, and we give the we give the file path to that document because it's in the working directory, which is the directory we're working in. I'm just going to repeat myself there. We just need to give the file name. If it were in another directory or somewhere on the internet, we'd need to give a file path for it. So you don't need to save an actual Word template. You can just save a document, and it will actually, and R Markdown will actually pull the template off that document and format your new document to look like the old one, or to look like the one you've got saved. So we can change, that's a header 2, we can change that header 2 to read whatever we want it to read. First header. And then this is body text, so we can add whatever we want to in here. Let's find some text. So Macbeth's famous soliloquy from Macbeth. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this pace from day to day. Blah, blah, a tale told by an idiot full of sound and fury signifying nothing. We're going to replace our text with that because it's a great quote. And we're going to add a double space at the end of each line so it knows there's a line break. And it will treat that as body text. We're just going to call it Macbeth soliloquy. And then we're going to render this document, and it will have the same, it will, fingers crossed, have the same formatting, the same styles applied as that previous document that we worked on. And for some reason, it's currently rendering to dark mode in Word for me. If we change that, you can see that our new example here, that W looks a bit odd for some reason. I don't know why that's like that. There we go. No, I blame Word. But you can see that our new example, so the font here is that sans serif font we specified before, and our headers are the font and color and everything else that we specified before. And you can specify an awful lot of things when you edit a style in Word. And then once you've got a document style that you're happy with, you can save that, and then all of your Markdown Word documents can come out in the same format. So that's a really neat feature that is actually very, very easy to use. So that is that. And as I say, all you do is you just add this in the headers. The document can have any name it likes. I chose the name guaranteed to confuse everyone as much as possible because that's me. Okay, that is all I wanted to say. I'm not going to give you a document to try and reproduce because I think we've gone on long enough. But what I will do is I'll send you the RMD files that we've looked at today, and I'll also send you the HTML document that our other document renders to, and you can use that as a reference if you want. I sent you all some links yesterday to some online documentation, so hopefully that will be helpful as well. But does anyone have any questions about what we've looked at? I'm going to go back to the collaborate window and stop that sharing because it causes me confusion. Anyone got any questions about what we've looked at today? No? Everyone happy? No. I'm pretty sure you can't. I think you have to generate those objects in your Markdown document. Let's find out. Yeah, I'll email that to everyone, Beth. Oh, now you see, I thought you couldn't, James, but now that I'll send you the whole document, so don't worry about that.
So does that mean that you do your kind of whole analysis and run everything within R Markdown and then just pull through the parts that you want that you need for the final document? Or
if you're doing reproducible research, you should have all of your analysis there anyway. And obviously, if you have an object in the global environment that's not generated in your Markdown document, then you can only generate your Markdown document if that object's there in the global environment. So it's much better to do it all in your Markdown document. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have to be visible. You know, if you use include equals false as your chunk header, then it won't be visible in the final document. But it's best to have the whole thing in a single document. You can then just move your Markdown document without, and any data files you need, obviously, without having to worry about something that you've generated using a different script in R. I think you can access global environment objects, but it's bad practice. I wouldn't recommend it. Obviously, it's not as bad as indenting things with tabs, but I think I wouldn't recommend you do that. I would try and keep everything in a single document.
So that means that is quite a big change, at least for me. It means moving away from opening a script and saying this is a script for this and so on. It means literally you have your R Markdown file and that's it. You work in there and you finish it in there.
Yeah. I mean, you don't have to, but I would. I mean, what I would do. Cheers, Beth. Yeah, I'll put this on YouTube as well. What I would do, James, is I wouldn't rely on things in our global environment for your Markdown document. If you want to do some analysis or generate a data frame separately from your Markdown document, save that data frame as a CSV file or something, and then load it into your Markdown document so that it's really clear where it's coming from. What you want, so what you want is something where you can come back 5 years after you did the analysis and look at your document and all the analysis you did is there and you can work out what you did, which is often really hard to do with a script unless you've commented it really well. It's, R Markdown is ideal for that, and you want that whole analysis process. So I would, you don't have to have all of the analysis for your whole thesis in one document, but I wouldn't rely on things in the environment, in the R environment, for your Markdown document. So if you've got one script that generates a data frame and then another script that analyzes it, I wouldn't do that. I have the data frame generation in the document, or I generate the data frame separately and I'd save it as a CSV file and then load it in. Does that help?
Yeah, definitely. And then as you import it, you can say, I'm importing this data frame and it includes this information, and it's really clear. Yeah, that's really helpful.
Yeah, exactly. So you know where it's coming from.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anyone else for any questions? It's nice doing this online with people who aren't undergraduate students, because you people actually use your microphones and everything, rather than just putting questions in the comments, which are usually, does this have marks? Do we need to know this in the exam? And that kind of thing. Okay, everyone okay? Yes, Jane. This is 10 marks, and if you get 8 out of 10, you can buy me a beer sometime. Okay? Okay. I hope that was useful for everyone. Hopefully you'll find that this is actually quite an easy thing to use, and then you too can generate awesome looking documents and make everyone think you're really smart. Okay, so have a great weekend, everyone. I'll email all the stuff around later on today, and any questions, just ask. I'm happy to help. Okay, so I will stop the recording and head off.
Thank